Rebecca Anderson's hand began shaking before the wax did. It was a small thing, one invitation among 40, cream paper edged in gilt, Lady Anderson's looped signature already dry, but the spoon slipped against the candle flame, and a dark red bead of sealing wax leapt, spread, and bled across 2 names and half a date. It looked, Rebecca thought with a detached little horror, exactly like a wound. The breakfast room went still for 1 beat. Then Lady Anderson set down her coffee cup with care that was more frightening than noise. "How very apt," she said, with soft amusement that never reached her eyes. "Miss Anderson has ruined what she touches as usual." Her cousins laughed because they always laughed when Lady Anderson paused to let them. Rebecca did not answer. At 22, she had perfected the art of silence so completely that people mistook it for dullness, meekness, even gratitude. In truth, it was economy. Words cost strength, and strength was precious. "Stand in the corridor," her stepmother said. "1 hour, and you will copy every damaged card before noon. If your hand can still manage letters, after all." Rebecca rose without protest, set down the spoon, and left the room while the silver covers were still being lifted from kidneys and toast. Her stomach clenched hard enough to make her dizzy. Hunger did that now, sharp, private, humiliating, because mistakes were paid for in missed meals, and mistakes had grown easier since her father died. In the corridor, between 2 marble busts that neither looked kindly, she stood with her palms pressed together to hide the trembling. The house had once been partly her home. Her father had laughed in these passages, had left ledgers open on tables, had called her from the stairs to ask whether column 3 balanced with column 6. After his death, it belonged fully to Lady Anderson in every way that mattered. Rebecca remained in it as unpaid companion, copyist, and useful target. A maid hurried past with linens, saw her standing there and looked away quickly. Not out of contempt, out of fear of being seen seeing. By the half-hour mark, Rebecca's knees ached. By the hour she had composed in her mind 6 corrected invitations and 1 neat account of the month's coal costs that no one had asked her to prepare. Precision steadied her. When Lady Anderson's bell rang, Rebecca returned to the writing table, took up fresh paper, and copied names in a hand so exact that gentlemen complimented it as almost clerkly, not intending insult and never hearing it anyway. Her father had taught her legal hand deliberately against fashion and expectation. "Figures are a language," he used to tell her, tapping the margin where debits met credits. "And language is power if you keep it clean." She had kept it clean. She kept everything clean. The correspondence, the household journals, the social calendars Lady Anderson claimed as her own labour. She kept her own face smooth when cousins called her plain as an ink blot. They saw a narrow, pale face, a severe mouth, dark hair forever escaping pins, and eyes too large to flatter. They did not see that watchfulness was a kind of armour. Pretty girls were handled. Plain girls were overlooked. Overlooked girls learned things. By 11 she had completed the invitations and carried them to the front hall. In the kitchen passage beyond, a yelp cut through the ordinary clatter. Rebecca turned at once. Martha, the youngest scullery maid, had stumbled against the kettle hook. Boiling water had splashed her forearm, and she was biting her lip hard enough to draw blood, while cook scolded her for carelessness and reached for a cloth with all the urgency of someone wiping a spill. "Cold water," Rebecca said, already crossing the room. "Now! Keep it under. Do not rub." Cook frowned. "Miss, lady will—" "Cold water," Rebecca repeated sharper, and took Martha by the wrist herself, guiding her to the pump. The skin was reddening and beginning to lift near the wrist bone. Rebecca tore a strip from the inside hem of her petticoat, clean linen hidden beneath the outer fold, and wrapped it lightly once the burn had cooled. Martha's eyes shone with shame and pain. "Oh, I'm sorry, miss. I didn't mean—" "You need not apologise for injury," Rebecca said. "Only for preventable foolishness. This was not foolishness." Footsteps sounded at the door. Of course they did. Lady Anderson stood framed by light from the hall, lavender silk perfect, expression disappointed in the way she wore best. "How touching!" she murmured. "My stepdaughter abandons her tasks to play physician in the scullery." "I had finished the cards," Rebecca said, "and still forgot your place." That afternoon Rebecca copied 2 additional letters as punishment for insolence, then carried tea to guests who discussed charity toward the poor, without seeing the girl who poured for them. By evening her arm ached where the kettle steam had caught her own skin unnoticed in the confusion, a narrow, angry strip just above the cuff. She cleaned it in silence, in the tiny attic room she alone could lock. The room had sloped ceilings and one narrow window that admitted more wind than light. Her trunk stood at the foot of the bed, containing 3 dresses, 2 books, and a packet wrapped in oilcloth. She unwrapped it now, as if the motion itself might quiet her pulse. Old ledgers in her father's hand, copies of trust documents, notes on tenant rents, examples of signatures done in different legal styles. Her true inheritance, she sometimes thought. Not money. If any had been left to her, she had never seen it, but competency no one could confiscate. She traced one line with her fingertip. Anderson, E., witness. The letters were strong, measured, unmistakably taught by him. Below, laughter swelled from the drawing-room. Tomorrow Lady Anderson would display her at Lady Penrith's musicale, as one displays modest porcelain among brighter pieces. Rebecca repacked the papers and slid the key beneath her pillow before she slept. Even in sleep her hands twitched, as if still balancing columns. Lady Penrith's gardens 2 days later smelled of roses, trampled grass, and expensive indifference. Musicians sat under a striped awning near the south lawn, their bows rising and falling while matrons discussed weather and daughters and debts, in voices pitched to be overheard by exactly the correct people. Rebecca stood beside Lady Anderson's chair with a tray of lemonade glasses she had no business carrying and no right, apparently, to refuse. "Smile," Lady Anderson breathed without moving her lips. "If you look sullen, everyone will assume you are angling for pity. No one marries pity." Rebecca set down the tray and arranged her face accordingly. The first time a flower had come, it arrived through footman, a white rosebud left on the hall table at Anderson House with no card. Lady Anderson had claimed it was from one cousin mocking another. The second had appeared on Rebecca's writing desk at dawn, startling in the grey light, and vanished before breakfast when Lady Anderson swept through her room, inspecting dust. No explanation either time. Rebecca had told herself it meant nothing. Now she saw the child before she saw the flower. He moved with grave concentration through knots of adults who stepped aside from him instinctively. 6 years old, if gossip was accurate. Dark coat despite the warmth, hair too fair for his expression. The Duke of Norhaven's son, Oliver. He stopped directly in front of her and held up a white rosebud, stem wrapped in ribbon. "For you," he said. His voice was clear, careful, and much softer than surrounding laughter. Rebecca stared a moment too long, then bent to his level. "Thank you, my lord." He frowned with solemn offence. "I am only Oliver." "Thank you, Oliver." He nodded, satisfied, and pushed something else toward her with his other hand. A folded card, thick cream, sealed in grey wax with a ducal crest she recognised from envelopes Lady Anderson opened with avid fingers. Around them, conversation faltered, then resumed louder, as conversation does when people pretend not to stare. Rebecca looked up. Across the lawn, near an orange tree in a porcelain tub, stood the Duke of Norhaven. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed with unremarkable perfection. His face gave away almost nothing. Clean lines, compressed mouth, eyes a cool, unreadable grey, fixed not on his son, not on the crowd, but on Rebecca, as if measuring what she would do. She broke the seal with gloved fingers and read, "Miss Anderson. If you would grant me 10 minutes in the orangery, I should be obliged. The matter concerns my son, Norhaven. No flourish, no title, no explanation beyond the one line that made refusal difficult." Lady Anderson's nails bit suddenly into Rebecca's wrist through kid leather. "What is it?" she asked brightly, for the benefit of nearby listeners. "Surely nothing improper." "A request for an interview, madam," Rebecca said, keeping her tone even. "From His Grace! How singularly fortunate!" Lady Anderson's smile widened by fractions. "Go at once, child. We cannot have a duke waiting." The orangery stood beyond clipped yews, warm and damp and smelling of citrus peel. The Duke was already there, one hand on the back of a wrought-iron chair, posture so controlled it seemed almost painful. "Miss Anderson!" He inclined his head. "Thank you for coming!" She dipped a curtsy. "Your Grace requested—" "Yes?" He glanced toward the glass where the garden blurred green. "My son has recently lost his governess, abruptly. He has refused every replacement to a degree that has made instruction impossible. He does not speak to strangers, and to household staff he speaks rarely at all." Rebecca waited. "For reasons known only to himself," the Duke continued, as if each additional sentence had to be pried loose. "He has identified you as acceptable. The flowers were his insistence. Mine was merely the delivery." A beat passed. Her fingers tightened around the rose stem. "I ask," he said, "whether you would consider residing at Norhaven House for 1 month as temporary instructor and companion to my son while we stabilise his routine. You would be properly chaperoned and compensated." Before Rebecca could form an answer, silk rustled behind her. Lady Anderson swept in without invitation, cheeks touched pink with triumph. "Your Grace, what an honour! Miss Anderson is overwhelmed, as you see, quite overcome by your confidence." The Duke's expression cooled another degree. "I had asked Miss Anderson directly, and she is so dutiful that she will of course do as family advises," Lady Anderson said smoothly. Her hand found Rebecca's elbow, precious, sweet and sharp. "We accept with gratitude. She will be delighted to serve." Rebecca turned her head. Lady Anderson's smile never altered. Her eyes warned like drawn wire. "I had not yet answered," Rebecca said quietly. "Nonsense," her stepmother murmured, still smiling at the Duke. "Do not be coy. His Grace is not proposing marriage." The Duke looked from one woman to the other, unreadable again. "If Miss Anderson declines, the matter ends." Lady Anderson laughed lightly. "Decline? In this economy? Forgive me, Your Grace, my stepdaughter is modest to a fault. She accepts." The words settled like a lock turning. Oliver appeared at the doorway then, as silent as a cat, and went to stand beside his father without touching him. He looked at Rebecca, not pleading exactly, but waiting. She thought of his careful voice. "I am only Oliver." "I will come for 1 month," she said at last, because she could not make herself disappoint that child in front of all those listening walls. "If terms are written and proper." "Of course," said the Duke. "Excellent," said Lady Anderson. When they returned to the lawn, several ladies suddenly found urgent interest in their music programmes. The carriage ride home rattled over ruts and through dusk, curtains drawn against dust and eyes. Lady Anderson waited until they had passed the second toll gate before dropping pretense. "You will not embarrass me," she said, looking straight ahead. Rebecca flexed her wrist where crescent marks already purpled. "I was not aware my employment reflected your dignity." "Everything about you reflects on me, unfortunately." Lady Anderson adjusted her gloves. "This arrangement is providential. Norhaven's invitations alone may quiet speculation about our accounts." "What's our accounts?" Rebecca bit the inside of her cheek. Debts were not rumour in that house. They were temperature, weather, gravity. She had seen bills hidden under blotters, "I owe us" tucked into prayer books, the names of creditors appearing in increasingly urgent hands. Lady Anderson continued, voice honey thin. "You will remember that you go there because I permit it. You will be agreeable, invisible when required, useful always. No displays of moral superiority in servants' halls. No lectures to gentlemen, no scenes. I have never made a scene." "Not yet." She turned then, smile gone. "If you make one misstep, if you give the county cause to whisper that my stepdaughter chases ducal favour, I will settle the matter immediately." Rebecca knew before she said the name. "Sir Basil Trent has renewed his offer," Lady Anderson said. "Generous, considering your age and your appearance. He is willing to take you without dowry, in exchange for favourable terms, on certain notes. If Norhaven proves inconvenient, you will marry him before Michaelmas. I have his draft contract ready." The carriage seemed to narrow, air thinning around her stays. Sir Basil, 68, rheumy-eyed, smelling of peppermints and old wool, twice widowed, creditor to half the county, and admirer of girls who did not argue. "You cannot compel me," Rebecca said, though even to her own ears it sounded like a line from a play, not law. Lady Anderson's laugh was brief. "Compel! My dear, compulsion is vulgar. I will merely withdraw shelter. You have no dowry, no brothers, no income, and nowhere to go that will not ask who ruined you. Accept gratitude and choose comfort." Gratitude! The word was a leash in that mouth. When the carriage stopped, Rebecca stepped down without waiting for a hand. She moved through the hall, up the back stair, and into her attic room before anyone could call her back. There, with the door bolted, she leaned both palms on the washstand until the shaking passed. Below, voices rose and fell over supper she would not be invited to. Somewhere in the dark of the garden a fox barked once. Rebecca lit one candle, took out her father's packet, and opened a blank page in the back of an old ledger. At the top she wrote, in legal hand so steady it surprised her, "Terms under duress are not consent." She added beneath it every detail she could remember: date, location, witnesses, exact phrasing of Lady Anderson's threat, mention of Sir Basil's contract, the Duke's request, Oliver's delivery of the flower. Facts first, feelings after, if ever. By the time the candle guttered low, the page was full. She sanded the ink, closed the ledger, and held the white rosebud to her face. It still smelled faintly of rain. 1 month at Norhaven House. One error, and she would be sold respectably. For the first time in years, the fear in her chest did not feel like paralysis. It felt like the moment before a locked door gives way, not because it is kindly opened, but because someone has finally learned where to press. The next knock came at her attic door before dawn. 3 clipped taps she knew too well. "Up!" Lady Anderson called through the wood. "If you miss the 8 o'clock coach, I shall tell His Grace you are unreliable before you begin." Rebecca slid the ledger page beneath her mattress, splashed water on her face, and opened the door already dressed. Lady Anderson looked her over as if assessing market linen. "That collar is too plain. It is clean. Try to remember there is a difference between poverty and negligence." Rebecca said nothing. Silence still cost less. By 7:30 her small trunk was strapped, her cloak brushed, and her stomach hollow. In the front hall, Lady Anderson announced to the butler, loudly enough for 2 footmen and a passing maid, that she would accompany her stepdaughter to Norhaven House as temporary chaperone for appearance's sake. The butler bowed without expression. Rebecca caught from the corner of her eye the quick flicker of satisfaction in Lady Anderson's mouth. She had not asked permission from the Duke. She had informed the world. The carriage smelled of lavender sachet and cold leather. Lady Anderson reviewed instructions before they reached the 1st-mile marker. "You will call him your Grace. Never, sir. You will not linger in corridors. You will not be alone in drawing-rooms. You will not accept books, flowers, or favours that can be construed as personal." The flowers were from his son. "Do not be literal with me, Rebecca. It is unbecoming." A pause. "And you will sign Sir Basil's preliminary understanding tonight." Rebecca turned her head. "I will not." Lady Anderson smiled at the passing hedges. "You may choose not to. Then I may choose not to maintain your room on your return." The rhythm of wheels covered Rebecca's breath for a moment. She looked out at fields lifting into morning mist and counted fence posts until her pulse slowed. Norhaven House appeared just past 10. Pale stone, long frontage, windows bright as if polished by weather itself. It did not flaunt grandeur. It assumed it. Grooms moved quietly in the yard. 2 dogs crossed the gravel with that loose confidence of creatures never kicked. A woman in dove grey met them in the entry hall. "Miss Anderson, Lady Anderson, I am Mrs. Vale, housekeeper." Her courtesy to Rebecca was exact. To Lady Anderson, cooler by a shade. "His Grace will receive you in the morning room." The Duke stood by the hearth, though no fire burned. Oliver sat at a low table with wooden letters arranged in military rows, not touching them. He looked up when Rebecca entered, then down again, but his shoulders eased. "Miss Anderson," the Duke said, "thank you for coming promptly." "You requested terms in writing, Your Grace," Rebecca said, "before duty begins." A small pause, approval perhaps, or surprise. He offered a folded document. 1 month, salary specified weekly, duties limited to instruction and companionship of my son. Separate room for your use. You may withdraw with a week's notice. "On the chaperone?" His glance moved, politely blank, to Lady Anderson. "Lady Anderson may remain as guest for 3 days. After that, Mrs. Vale will supervise household propriety, as is customary." Lady Anderson's smile tightened, then recovered. "How perfectly arranged!" Rebecca read every clause. No hidden codicils. No language that converted obligation into debt. She signed. When she finished, Oliver rose, came to her side, and put his hand against her sleeve for 1 second only, as if confirming texture, then withdrew. "You came," he said. "Yes," she answered. "You asked." That first day taught her more than any introduction could. Oliver read easily, but refused to recite aloud. He could add in his head faster than most adults she knew, yet froze when asked to write his name. Loud laughter in the corridor made him flinch so sharply he knocked ink over his cuff and went rigid, waiting for anger. Rebecca handed him a cloth and said only, "Ink is washable. Panic is less so. We begin again." He studied her face with fierce caution. "You aren't shouting." "I dislike wasting breath." A corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile, gone at once. By supper he had spoken 17 sentences to her, and 3 to anyone else. Mrs. Vale noticed. So did the Duke, though he mentioned it only after Oliver was dismissed and the dining room had emptied. "You have my thanks," he said, hands braced on chairback, voice formal enough to frost glass. "This is the most he has engaged since March." "March," Rebecca repeated before she could stop herself. His jaw shifted. "His governess left then." The words were bare fact. The space around them was not. She understood she had touched a locked hinge and stepped back. "I will keep routine. Predictability may help." "Do so." That was all. Gratitude, distance, dismissal. She went to her room with tired feet and a mind too wakeful. On the second morning Oliver refused breakfast because the jam had changed jars. "Miss Harbury never changed jars," he said, staring at his plate. "Miss Harbury is not here," Rebecca said gently. His spoon clattered. "She said she would come back after 2 nights." Rebecca did not lie. Then she was wrong. His breathing went shallow. He shoved his chair and ran for the window alcove, folding into himself behind the curtain. A footman took 1 step forward. She held up a hand. "No one touch him." She crouched 2 feet away from the curtain hem. "Oliver, you may stay there. I will read where you can hear me." No answer. She opened a geography primer and began, in an even voice, with coastlines and river mouths. After 2 pages, the curtain twitched. After 4, a small shoe appeared. After 10, he emerged and sat on the floor at her feet, head against her skirt, listening as if words were stones laid across deep water. By the end of the week, he was writing his name again. The house began to recalibrate around that fact. Servants who had moved like mourners now moved like workers. The nursery maid hummed while folding stockings. Mrs. Vale sent up fresh chalk without being asked. Even the Duke altered by degrees, less abrupt in doorways, less flint in his tone when Oliver laughed too loudly. But he remained careful with Rebecca, every exchange polished to propriety. At luncheon on the 6th day, he said, "You may use the small library after lessons." "Thank you, Your Grace. It contains maps. He favours maps." "Then so do I." His eyes met hers briefly, grey and unreadable. "So I have observed." Lady Anderson stayed not 3 days but 5, by pleading migraine on the 4th and arranging a necessary call with neighbouring ladies on the 5th. By the time she left, she had planted enough insinuation for a season. Rebecca felt the first shoots at church, where 2 matrons ceased whispering only when she looked directly and at them. She heard the next at tea with Colonel Hemsley's wife. "How admirable! Your devotion to children of consequence." The phrase sat on consequence like a pin. In the village lane a groom tipped his cap and then flushed, as if greeting her had become loaded. Inside Norhaven the whispers came padded in courtesy. A visiting cousin of the Duke's, smiling over syllabub. "My dear Miss Anderson, everyone says you have quite transformed the nursery. One hopes you won't find greater ambitions now your talents are recognised." A dowager at cards. Temporary appointments are such useful stepping stones for girls without settlement. Rebecca answered each with impeccable calm, and felt each answer scrape. Letters from Anderson House arrived every other day. Lady Anderson's hand sloped elegantly across cream paper, and carried the same message in fresh arrangements. "Sir Basil remains willing. Your gratitude is overdue. Sign before terms worsen. Remember who gave you shelter." One enclosed a draft agreement already filled except for her signature. In the margin Lady Anderson had written, "Do not force my hand." Rebecca burned that letter in her grate and copied its contents into her ledger before the ash cooled. The worst day began with bright weather and hunt breakfast on the north lawn. Half the county seemed present, boots and scarlet and easy arrogance. Rebecca had no role there. She sat with Oliver under a chestnut tree and reviewed spelling while hounds barked and gentlemen compared horses as if discussing artillery. A shout cut through the noise, then another. Near the mounting block, a young stable boy had been thrown and trampled by a gelding that reared at a snapping whip. Men crowded, talking over one another, nobody kneeling. The boy's leg lay at an angle wrong enough to turn Rebecca's stomach. She was moving before thought caught up. "Blankets!" she snapped at the nearest groom. "And someone hold that horse before it kills someone else." A baronet put out an arm. "Miss, this is no place." "It is precisely the place." She dropped to her knees beside the boy, who was white and shaking. Blood pulsed through his torn stocking. "What is your name?" "Tom," he gasped. "Tom, look at me." "You are not to sleep." She tore the inner hem from her petticoat, wrapped pressure above the wound, and looked up. 3 gentlemen still argued about whether to move him. "Stop debating and fetch the surgeon," she said, voice like a blade. "Now!" No one moved for one fatal second. Then the Duke said, "Do as she says." He was already kneeling opposite her, coat darkening in the grass, his hand steadying the boy's shoulders. Orders flew. A groom ran, someone brought splints. The baronet retreated, muttering. When the surgeon finally arrived, he found the bleeding slowed and the leg immobilized between 2 polished crop sticks and a strip of Rebecca's underlinen. He gave her a look halfway between astonishment and respect before taking over. Only then did she realize her hands were sticky with blood and mud. She rose too quickly, swayed, and felt the Duke's hand at her elbow. Light, immediate, gone again. "You acted correctly," he said quietly. She swallowed. "Someone had to." His gaze held hers a beat too long, as if recalculating a sum with new numbers. "Indeed." That evening he asked to see her in the study after Oliver slept. The room smelled of leather and rain-damp wool. He stood by the desk, not sitting, as if the conversation required armour. "Miss Anderson," he began, formal as ever, "today's events have already generated comment. Of course, it is my duty to prevent further speculation that could injure you." He looked at the window, not at her. "You have done what I asked. Oliver is improved. Once his routine remains stable for another fortnight, propriety requires that you depart." The words landed with absurd neatness, like papers stacked. She clasped her hands behind her back to keep them still, useful until inconvenient, always. "As you wish, Your Grace." His jaw tightened. "This is not censure. No, it is management." He flinched almost invisibly. "It is protection." "Whose?" Silence stretched. Then he said, "Good night, Miss Anderson," in the tone of a man closing a door from the inside. She curtsied and left before her composure cracked. In her room she sat on the edge of the bed and laughed once, sharply at herself. She had not expected kindness. Yet disappointment burned anyway, less because he had dismissed her than because some foolish part of her had begun to believe she was seen here as more than function. A soft tap came at the connecting nursery door. Oliver's whisper, "Are you going away?" She opened the door a hand's breadth. His hair stuck up. His nightshirt was inside out. "Not tonight," she said. He nodded, satisfied for the moment, and went back to bed. Rebecca stood in the dark a long time after. The next morning brought rain and an apology in administrative form. Mrs. Vale met Rebecca outside the schoolroom with a basket of account books balanced on her hip. "His Grace asks whether you might assist, Mr. Penlow," she said. "Our estate steward has taken to his room with gout, and quarter-day entries are behind. Only until he returns." Rebecca blinked. "He wants me to work the ledgers. He said, and I quote, 'Miss Anderson reads columns as if born to them. Ask politely.'" Against her will, warmth pricked behind her ribs. "Then yes." The estate office sat off the west corridor, quieter than the formal rooms and far more to her taste. High desks, inkstands, shelves of rent rolls tied with tape. The first ledger she opened was competent but untidy. The second worse. She set to sorting arrears by parish, annotating receipts, and correcting a transposition that had doubled a tenant's debt on paper. Rain ticked at the windows. Her breathing settled into the old rhythm. Check, total, verify, carry. By noon, she reached an older chest marked Trusts, closed. The lock was stiff, the key tagged in Mr. Penlow's hand. She should perhaps have set it aside. Instead, she opened it because the label closed had often meant hidden in houses like hers. Inside lay bundled documents spanning 20 years. She lifted one packet, untied faded tape, and froze. The script on the top folio tilted slightly right, firm on downstrokes, spare on flourish. She would have known it in a fire. Her father's hand. For a moment sound narrowed to the drum of rain. She sat very still and read. Anderson Settlement Trust, established for the benefit of Rebecca Elin Anderson, sole beneficiary, payable upon attaining age 21, principal amount £5,000, accruing interest at stipulated rate. The page blurred, sharpened. She turned to the next. Annual notations, transfers, signatures of trustees. The final entry 2 years earlier marked disbursed, waiver provided by beneficiary. Attached, a waiver bearing her name, a smooth imitation so close it might have passed at a glance. At a glance, not under scrutiny. Rebecca pulled scrap paper, copied 3 letters from the forged signature, then 3 from her own hand. The forged R began high and curled inward. Hers began low and straight. The forged D loop closed too tight. Her father had drilled into her for years. Never cramp legal loops. They invite tampering. Her hands were steady now for reasons that had nothing to do with calm. She gathered the packet, closed the chest, and went straight to the Duke's library, mud from the corridor still on her hem. He was at the window with correspondence, coat off, shirt sleeves rolled. He turned at her entrance and read her face in one glance. "What is it?" She set the documents on his desk. "Did you know this existed?" His gaze dropped to the top page. Colour left his face by degrees. "Where did you find—" "In your closed trusts, in my father's hand. £5,000 and interest payable at 21, marked disbursed on the basis of this." She tapped the waiver. "My signature is forged." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them on the rain. "Yes." The single syllable struck harder than denial. "You knew," she said, each word precise. "And you said nothing while I scrubbed invitations and stood punished for breathing." His head came up. "I knew of the trust and of a waiver presented by Lady Anderson years ago. At the time it appeared regular. You were not present. She claimed illness. The signature—" He stopped, jaw hard. "I accepted it. I should not have." "Why investigate now?" His mouth thinned. "Because my son would not cease asking for the lady who listens." She stared. He continued, voice rougher than she had ever heard it. "After he saw you at Penrith's, he remembered you from a winter call years ago. He insisted on sending flowers. I allowed it to quiet him. Then I looked at your name on old papers, and something in the hand troubled me. I had our solicitor retrieve the trust file. By then the clerk who witnessed the waiver had vanished into Sir Basil Trent's employ." "Sir Basil, of course." "The flowers," she said slowly, "were not courtship theatre." "No." A humourless breath. "They were a 6-year-old's campaign and a coward's attempt to open a conversation he had no right words for." The room held only rain and the tick of the bracket clock. "I intended to tell you once evidence was secure," he said, "before any formal accusation." Before I was dismissed for propriety. He flinched again, less hidden this time. I thought distance would protect you from this house's talk while I corrected matters quietly. Quietly, Rebecca repeated, and understood with sudden clarity that quiet had been the method of every theft in her life. Quiet punishments, quiet coercions, quiet signatures made on her behalf. She straightened the packet under her hand like a blade she had finally chosen to lift. No, Your Grace, not quietly. Something in her tone made him still. I want copies of every trust entry, every witness signature, every transfer note, she said. I want the name of the dismissed clerk and the date he entered Sir Basil's service. I want your solicitor present when I review them, and I will decide what to file in my own name. He watched her for a long moment, then inclined his head, not as duke to dependent, but as one mind recognising another. Very well, Miss Anderson. She gathered the papers, pulse hard and clean. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. No longer a cage, a direction. She would not flee, she would not barter silence for safety again. He moved at once. Norhaven rang for his solicitor, for copying clerks, for locked dispatch cases. Within an hour, Mr. Crowthorne, a narrow, iron-haired man with spectacles that flashed when he disapproved, was seated across from Rebecca at the library table while the rain deepened against the panes. State only what you know, Miss Anderson, he said, uncapping ink. Not what you suspect. She did. Dates, signatures, Lady Anderson's phrasing in the carriage, Sir Basil's contract, the dismissed clerk's transfer into Sir Basil's employ. She gave each fact the way her father had taught her to build a ledger, line by line, no flourishes, no mercy for error. Crowthorne listened, then compared her current signature to the waiver. His mouth flattened. The hand is imitative, he said, a competent forgery, but not yours. He looked to the Duke. If this proceeds, it will not stay private? It was never going to, Rebecca said, before the Duke could answer. By evening, copies were made and sealed. The originals were returned to the trust chest under 2 locks, 1 key with Crowthorne, 1 with the Duke. Rebecca carried carbon notes to her room and slept with them under her pillow anyway. She did not sleep much. The backlash began by breakfast. A note arrived from Lady Anderson in violet ink and impeccable rage. You presume very far above your station. Return at once. You are neither niece nor ward now, but an ungrateful dependent stealing papers, not hers. Sir Basil will not be mocked. Rebecca read it once and handed it to the Duke without comment. His eyes skimmed, hardened. She has been informed too quickly, he said. Someone writes to her from this house, Rebecca replied. Mrs. Vale found the culprit by supper, a second footman with gaming debts, and a talent for loose seals. He was dismissed before dusk, but the damage had run ahead of him. By the next day, visitors arrived at Norhaven under transparent pretexts. A vicar's wife returning a book she had never borrowed. A neighbouring squire, in passing. Lady Cumnor, who came expressly to look at Rebecca's face while saying, How trying, dear, these misunderstandings in blended families. At noon, a carriage emblazoned with the Trent crest rolled up the gravel drive. Sir Basil did not descend. Lady Anderson did, in dove blue silk and widow's pearls, smiling as if for a christening. Beside her came a thin man with a legal satchel Rebecca recognised from Anderson House. Mr. Lark, Sir Basil's attorney. They were shown to the small drawing-room. The Duke remained standing. Rebecca took a chair and kept her hands folded in her lap. Lady Anderson accepted tea she did not drink. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. Family distress compels frankness. Be frank, then, he said. Rebecca is engaged. She laid a folded parchment on the table and smoothed it with 2 fingers. To Sir Basil Trent she accepted in principle months ago. This signed is her preliminary contract. Rebecca did not reach for it. It is another forgery. Lady Anderson gave a tiny laugh. How convenient that every signature you dislike is forged. Mr. Lark slid the parchment toward the Duke instead. My client seeks no scandal. He asks only that Miss Anderson be released from duties here and returned to her legal guardian, pending marriage settlement. I am 22, Rebecca said. I have no legal guardian. Financial dependency creates practical guardianship, Lark said smoothly. Crowthorne, summoned and silent until now, spoke like a knife being laid on wood. Practical guardianship is not a doctrine recognised in law, sir. Lark's smile did not shift. Then let us speak of reputation. Which law cannot restore once spent? A young, unmarried lady residing under a duke's roof while contesting family moneys? It invites ugly constructions. My client is prepared to protect her from those constructions by fulfilling his engagement. Lady Anderson's gaze found Rebecca at last, sweet and unpoisonous. Come home, child, sign quietly. We can still avoid unpleasant hearings. Rebecca heard, under the words, the true stakes clicking into place. If Lady Anderson and Sir Basil fixed the narrative first, that Rebecca was jilted, unstable, or scheming, then every affidavit she filed would be read through contempt. Her recovered trust could be tied in chancery for years. Her name, once dirtied, would stain Oliver too, the governess who trapped a duke and forged her own fortune. The duke's voice went glacial. Miss Anderson remains here under lawful contract until she chooses otherwise. You will not remove her. Lady Anderson stood, rustling silk. Then you choose public war over private resolution. I choose evidence over coercion, Rebecca said. For the first time, Lady Anderson's mask slipped. Evidence? You mean numbers scribbled by a dead man and fantasies fed to you by servants? You have always mistaken usefulness for worth, Rebecca. Do not mistake a child's fondness for power. She swept out. Lark followed. On the threshold he paused just long enough to say, My client has already filed notice of intent to enforce contract. The door closed. Crowthorne exhaled through his nose. They mean to bury us in process and rumour before we can file criminal fraud. Can they? Rebecca asked. Not if we move first, he said. But we require corroboration. The dismissed clerk, originals, chain of custody unbroken. Outside, rain stopped. In the nursery above, Oliver began to cry, high, frantic, unlike his usual restrained tears. He had heard raised voices through the floorboards. Rebecca stood at once, but the Duke touched her sleeve, brief and careful. Let me. She hesitated, then nodded. What she had built here, a child's fragile trust, a foothold in truth, was now directly in Lady Anderson's line of fire. If she lost this battle, she would lose not only money, not only freedom, but the one place where she had begun to be believed. They moved quickly, and still were too slow. By dawn the following day, Crowthorne had arranged to take sworn statements before Magistrate Hensley in Market Town. It was only an emergency information sitting, preliminary sworn statements before formal chancery filing, nothing more. The trust originals stayed sealed at Norhaven under two-key custody. Crowthorne would not move them without proper production order, especially after signs of interference on the road. A rider was sent for Jonas Pike, the dismissed clerk, another for bank records tied to the trust disbursement. Rebecca wore her plainest dark dress, pinned her hair with brutal neatness, and carried her notes in a leather folio strapped under her cloak. Halfway to town, a wheel pin snapped on their carriage. The driver swore and dragged the horses to a halt. Crowthorne inspected the pin, brows knitting. This was filed through, he said quietly. Not where? Tampering. They lost 40 minutes changing coaches at an inn. When they reached the magistrate's chambers, Pike was already there. He stood between Sir Basil's man and a decanter, red-eyed, collar askew, but sober enough. Rebecca knew him at once from old household accounts. Clark's hand, Clark's stoop, Clark's cowardice. Hensley administered oaths. Pike swore that on Rebecca's 21st birthday, she had met Lady Anderson and himself in Anderson House's morning room, signed the waiver willingly, and accepted family management of the trust in exchange for support. She said she had no head for money, Pike added, glancing at the decanter. Asked her stepmother to take the burden. Rebecca felt something inside her go very still. That is false, Pike shrugged without looking at her. I know what I witnessed. Crowthorne produced signature comparisons. Pike said memory of Penangle was unreliable. Crowthorne produced wage records placing Pike in Sir Basil's employ months later. Pike called it unrelated. Hensley frowned, but not enough. On this emergency preliminary statement session, the magistrate said at last, without original instruments formally produced before me, and with conflicting sworn testimony, I cannot issue immediate warrant for fraud. I advise petition to Chancery for document production and injunction against contract enforcement. Slow, but proper. Slow, Lady Anderson's favourite word when used against anyone but herself. As they left chambers, Sir Basil's attorney inclined his head to Rebecca with oily regret. Dreadful, isn't it, when memories differ? On the ride back, rain began again, hard, slanting, relentless. Crowthorne stared out the window as if calculating battle lines. "We are not done," he said. "No," Rebecca answered, though her voice sounded distant in her own ears. Norhaven's lamps were lit when they returned. Mrs. Vale met them in the hall, face drained. "Miss Anderson," she said, "your room was entered." Rebecca ran up, 2 flights, skirts in her fists. Her door showed no damage, lock intact, opened by key then. Inside, drawers yawned, mattress slashed, trunk overturned. Her father's packet lay spilled across the floor like bones. She dropped to her knees and counted with shaking fingers. 1 ledger gone. Not the trust copies from today, those were in her folio, but the older one from Anderson House containing years of her notes, dates of punishments, copied threats, references to Sir Basil's debts, the page she had written the night before leaving home. Terms under duress are not consent. Gone! Mrs. Vale appeared in the doorway, stricken. "I am so sorry. We discovered it only at dinner. No servant admits entry." Crowthorne crouched beside Rebecca, picking up a surviving sheet by the edges. "This was targeted," he said. "They knew what to take." She laughed once, ragged. "Of course they did." From the nursery corridor came a thud, then silence. Oliver stood at the far end in his nightshirt, eyes huge, taking in the wreckage and the adults' faces. "Are they making you go?" he whispered. Rebecca opened her mouth. Nothing came. He backed away before she could reach him, shut his door, and this time locked it from inside. That night he did not answer when she read through the panel. Not geography, not stories, not the arithmetic game he liked. By morning he had spoken only to his nurse in single words. By afternoon he said nothing at all. The setback was total and unfixable by speed. Witness compromised, magistrate stalled, record stolen, child regressing. For the first time since finding the trust, Rebecca sat alone at her desk and put her face in her hands. What if Lady Anderson was right about one thing, that the machinery of rank and rumour would simply grind her down? She had facts. They had access, money, and practice in cruelty. Facts needed time. Ruin did not. A knock sounded. She straightened, wiped her eyes, and said, "Come." The Duke stood there, coat damp, expression stripped of its usual composure. "I failed to keep this house secure," he said. "You are not responsible for my stepmother's crimes." "I am responsible for underestimating them." His gaze moved over the torn drawer fronts, the cut mattress, "and for asking you to stand in the blast of them." She almost said I chose this. Instead, she said, "I don't know if choosing matters when they can steal the proof." He looked at her then with something painfully like grief. "It matters?" She wanted to believe him. She was too tired to pretend certainty. He did not sleep. After midnight, the corridors of Norhaven emptied to clock ticks and rain drip from gutter chains. In his study, the Duke, Adrian Norhaven to legal papers, simply father to one silent child, sat at his desk with the stolen ledger inventory before him and stared until the ink blurred. He had spent years mastering stillness because movement had once cost too much. As a younger son, he had watched his mother gamble affections like cards, watched his father mistake reserve for strength and tenderness for weakness. He had learned early that visible feeling became leverage in other hands. Then his wife had died in childbed while he stood useless outside a closed door, and the lesson had calcified into law. Control everything, need nothing, lose less. It had not worked, it had only changed the shape of loss. A small knock sounded. 1, 2, then pause, Oliver's pattern. "Come in," Adrian said. The boy entered barefoot, clutching a blanket. His face was pale, eyes shadowed. He climbed into the chair opposite and sat curled tight. "Is Miss Rebecca cross with me?" he asked without preamble. "No." She looked sad, like when nurse says thunder is far away, but it is not. Adrian swallowed. "She is hurt." "Not by you." Oliver picked at blanket fringe. "People go away when they're shouting." The words landed where armour was thinnest. Adrian leaned forward, forearms on knees, and made himself answer honestly. "Sometimes people go because they are frightened. Sometimes because they are forced. Sometimes because men like me wait too long to speak." Oliver studied him with old eyes in a child's face. "Are you frightened?" He could have lied. He did not. "Yes." "Of what?" "Of failing you again." A breath. "And of failing her." Oliver nodded, as if this matched some private arithmetic. "Then don't be quiet." When the child had gone back to bed, Adrian sat in the dark with that command ringing sharper than any accusation. He thought of Rebecca in the library, rain at her hem, saying, "Not quietly." He thought of dismissing her in the name of protection, while she stood alone against people who had practiced using her all her life. He thought of flowers sent by a son because a father could not begin with words. Near dawn he went to the schoolroom where she sat over maps. She was not reading. "Miss Anderson," he said. She looked up, weary from exhaustion. "I owe you statements I have not made plainly." His voice roughened despite effort. "I doubted you when you first came because I have spent years mistaking composure for character and gossip for warning. I told myself distance was duty. In truth, it was fear." Her hands stilled on the map edge. "I am afraid," he said, each word deliberate, "that anyone I value becomes a target. My son, you. I thought if I kept you at arm's length I could keep you safer. I was wrong." She watched him in silence, and he let silence stand without retreating into it. At last she said quietly, "Thank you for saying it before it is convenient." It was not absolution. It was real. He nodded once. "Crowthorne leaves for London at first light to file in Chancery. I will host the Midsummer Assembly as planned." She frowned. "Now!" Cancelling would signal weakness and feed their story. His mouth set. "Let them come. Let them speak publicly where witnesses cannot be edited." A spark returned to her gaze. worn but there. Then we prepare. By evening Norhaven House glittered. Lanterns hung in the lime avenue. Musicians tuned in the ballroom gallery. Carriages rolled in steady procession, wheels crunching gravel like distant surf. Midsummer brought half the county and all its appetites, for dancing, alliances and blood disguised as entertainment. Rebecca stood in the blue withdrawing room, while Mrs. Vale fastened the plain pearl clasp at her throat. "No bright colours?" Vale asked softly. "Not tonight." In her reticule lay copied trust entries, signature comparisons, Crowthorne's sworn memorandum, and a fresh statement in her own hand. Not enough for victory yet. Enough, perhaps, to survive first impact. Downstairs voices swelled. She descended with measured steps, each one a decision. People looked. Of course they looked. Some with sympathy, some with avid pity, some with that bright, cruel curiosity reserved for women rumoured to have overreached. Sir Basil arrived late, wrapped in velvet and self-importance, one gloved hand resting possessively on Lady Anderson's sleeve. She wore white of all colours, and greeted hostesses as if the night belonged to her. The Duke crossed the floor to receive them. His face was carved marble. Only Rebecca, watching, saw the tightness in his left hand. Before he released it, Oliver sat with Nurse near the musicians, solemn in a dark coat, a white rosebud in his buttonhole. When Rebecca passed, he touched 2 fingers to the bloom and then to his heart, their new signal for steady. She answered with the slightest nod. Dancing began. Toasts were offered. Rumour moved like smoke between couples. At the edge of the second set, Lady Anderson drew Sir Basil toward the centre and lifted her fan for attention. It was expertly done. Not loud, merely timed between cadences, so the room fell quiet around her by instinct. "My dear friends," she said, smiling into a ring of faces, "before the next dance, allow me a joyful family announcement." Rebecca felt, more than saw, the Duke go still 3 paces away. Lady Anderson extended her hand toward Rebecca as if bestowing favour. "My stepdaughter, Miss Rebecca Anderson, has at last accepted the honourable suit of Sir Basil Trent. We are delighted to confirm their engagement this evening." Gasps, murmurs, the scrape of a chair. Sir Basil beamed. Every head turned toward Rebecca. Her fingers closed around the papers in her reticule. For one suspended heartbeat, the entire room waited to see whether she would bow her head and let the lie harden into fact. Rebecca stepped forward. "Do not congratulate us," she said, her voice clear enough to carry to the gallery. "There is no engagement." The murmur broke, reformed, sharpened. Lady Anderson's smile held. "Child, you are overwrought. We discussed this." "No, you instructed. I did not consent." Rebecca turned not to the crowd but to the musicians. "Please stop." The first violin faltered to silence. Then she faced the Duke. "Your Grace, I request Mr. Crowthorne and Magistrate Hensley be asked to stand witness. They are both present." Every gaze in the room swung to him. He did not hesitate. "Mr. Crowthorne, Magistrate," he called, "if you please." Crowthorne appeared from the card-room doorway in black coat and legal impatience. Hensley, thick-browed and wary, came from beside the punch-bowl, setting down his glass untouched. The circle widened around them. Sir Basil gave a theatrical chuckle. "Surely we needn't turn a happy announcement into an inquest." Rebecca looked at him at last. "An inquest is exactly what your conduct invites." Lady Anderson snapped open her fan. "Rebecca, enough. You are embarrassing yourself." "I have been embarrassed for years," Rebecca said. "Tonight I prefer accuracy." She drew papers from her reticule, copied trust entries, signature comparisons, Crowthorne's memorandum, and held them steady, though her heart hammered against her stays. "My father established a trust in my name," she said. £5,000 with interest payable when I turned 21. It was marked disbursed on the strength of a waiver bearing my forged signature. A hiss ran through the listeners. Lady Anderson laughed, too brightly. A common clerical confusion. She has always romanticised account books. Then let us be unromantic, Rebecca said. She handed one sheet to Hensley, one to Crowthorne. Please note the initial stroke of the capital R in the waiver. It curls inward from a high start. In my legal hand it begins low and straight. Compare the loop of the terminal D. Closed in the waiver, open in mine. My father trained me specifically to avoid cramped loops because they are easily altered. Sir Basil's expression tightened by a fraction. Crowthorne adjusted his spectacles. The discrepancies are, as Miss Anderson states. Lady Anderson pivoted instantly. Even if so, what has that to do with Sir Basil's honourable offer? She accepted him freely. Mr. Lark holds the signed understanding. Produced by the same hand that forged the waiver, Rebecca said, and witnessed by Jonas Pike, your former clerk. At Pike's name, a thin man near the back stiffened and tried to edge behind a pillar. Rebecca saw him and pointed. There, Mr. Pike in Lord Cumnor's livery colours, but not his confidence. Heads turned. The crowd parted enough to expose him fully. Pike's face went waxy. Hensley frowned. You were sworn before me 2 days ago, man. Pike swallowed. I stand by my statement. Rebecca stepped toward him 1 pace. Then stand by your accounts as well. March 15th, 2 years ago, a trust disbursement draft was drawn from Norhaven trustees to Anderson Household Management. April 1st, a payment of near equal amount cleared Sir Basil Trent's gaming note at Harker and Bligh. The intermediary account belonged to you. Pike stared at her, then at Sir Basil. Sir Basil barked, Absurd! She invents figures. She copied them, Rebecca said. From bank abstracts your attorney failed to suppress before service. I spent 10 years balancing household ledgers while being told I had no head for money. That was an error in your strategy. Laughter, uneasy then real, rippled at the edge of the room. Lady Anderson's fan snapped shut. You spiteful, plain-faced little hypocrite! We fed you, clothed you, gave you a name. You gave me chores and called it charity, Rebecca cut in, the steel in her voice startling even herself. You used my labour unpaid, withheld my inheritance, and attempted to sell me to settle debts. Gratitude is not servitude. You forfeited any claim to obedience when you made my person collateral. The silence that followed was absolute. Sir Basil tried bluster. This is melodrama. Norhaven, control your governess. I am not his to control, Rebecca said, before the Duke could speak, and I am no longer your debtor's daughter. I am the beneficiary you defrauded. Hensley cleared his throat, suddenly very magistrate and not at all guest. Given allegations made in open company, I must advise immediate formal filing. Mr. Crowthorne. Crowthorne's voice was dry as paper. Prepared already. Lady Anderson turned toward the Duke in one last bid, velvet over venom. Your Grace, surely you see this for what it is, a bid for position. She has bewitched your son, now seeks your purse. The Duke's face might have been carved from winter. My son is not bewitched, he is listened to. A distinction you may never have learned. A low murmur of approval answered from quarters Lady Anderson had once counted loyal. Sir Basil stepped toward Rebecca, smile gone. Think carefully, girl. Public accusations cut both ways. Once you are in court, every letter you ever wrote will be pored over. Every hour under this roof named and priced. You may win money and lose what little reputation you possess. Rebecca met his gaze without flinching. Then let it be tested in law, not rumour. She turned to Hensley. "Magistrate, I request that my complaint be entered tonight in my own name for fraud, coercion, and attempted forced contract." Crowthorne inclined his head with unmistakable approval. At her side, the Duke said quietly, "For her alone. You need not do this from the centre of the floor." "I know," she answered, equally quiet. "I choose to." They did not fold. Lady Anderson demanded a private room at once, then emerged half an hour later with red-rimmed eyes and a new script: maternal concern, injured generosity, daughter led astray by ambition. Sir Basil marshalled 3 friendly gentlemen to declare he had believed the engagement genuine. Pike vanished before midnight, and had to be found at dawn in a posting inn, drunk and suddenly afflicted with selective memory. By noon, papers were filed. By evening, counter-papers arrived. A petition claiming Rebecca mentally unstable under hysterical overstrain, a claim that Norhaven had influenced her testimony, and notice of intent to sue for defamation. Lady Anderson's friends carried this version through parlours and pews with righteous speed. Crowthorne spread the filings across the Duke's study table. "They mean to drown substance in scandal," he said. "Very modern of them." Rebecca read every page, jaw tightening. "Then we answer substance with records they cannot perfume. You have records stolen." "I have patterns," she said, "and I know where patterns hide." She requested 2 things no one expected: access to Anderson House's old household account abstracts, and a writing desk with uncontested paper in chambers. Crowthorne stared at her, then smiled despite himself. "You intend demonstration." "I intend to make the lie expensive." At the preliminary Chancery hearing in London, the courtroom smelled of wool, damp stone, and sharpened quills. Rebecca sat behind Crowthorne, spine straight, while Lady Anderson entered in mourning silk and piety. Sir Basil looked irritable rather than afraid. Pike sweated through his collar. Sir Basil's counsel rose first, all polished condescension. Miss Anderson, he suggested, had been misled by arithmetic beyond feminine practical use. The waiver bore her name. The engagement bore her signature. Where was proof beyond offended pride? Crowthorne stood. Proof begins with handwriting, continues with funds flow, and ends with motive. He called Rebecca. A rustle moved through benches as she took the stand. She swore, sat, and folded her hands to stop their tremor. "Miss Anderson," Crowthorne said, "state your training." "My father taught me legal hand and estate accounts. From age 10, I copied tenancy rolls, reconciled household ledgers, and prepared correspondence under supervision." "Did you sign this waiver?" "No." "Can you explain the basis?" She did, stroke by stroke, loop by loop, with calm that grew as she spoke. Then Crowthorne asked what she had requested chambers for. The clerk set out fresh sheets. "Please write your full name 12 times, Crowthorne said, "at normal speed." She wrote. Ink whispered. The courtroom watched. Then Pike was called and ordered to do the same. He smudged the 3rd. On the 7th, his capital R rose high and curled inward. On the 9th, his terminal D cramped shut. A hum went through the room. Sir Basil's counsel objected to theatrics. The Chancellor, an old man who disliked being fooled, peered over spectacles and said, "Overruled? I enjoy penmanship when it is probative." Crowthorne moved to funds. Bank abstracts were entered. Trust disbursement, intermediary transfer, payment to Harker and Bligh, settling Sir Basil's gaming debt within 17 days. Sir Basil's counsel argued coincidence. Rebecca requested permission to speak to one-line item. Granted. "On the date in question," she said, indicating the ledger copy, "the intermediary account balance was £4, 11 shillings. It could not clear Sir Basil's note, absent trust funds. The transfer amount is unique down to 6pence because the note included interest arrears. The The same odd sixpence appears in both entries. Coincidence does not keep books that neatly. A few heads nodded despite themselves. Then Lady Anderson took the stand and tried fury. She painted Rebecca as ungrateful, difficult, plain and resentful of prettier cousins, liable to invention. She denied coercing marriage, denied threatening eviction, denied ever discussing debts with Pike. Rebecca asked leave to put one question directly. The Chancellor allowed it. Rebecca rose. "Did you or did you not write to me at Norhaven on the date of the 12th, quote, 'Sign before terms worsen. Remember who gave you shelter'?" Lady Anderson's chin lifted. "A figure of speech." Rebecca produced the original letter, preserved and sealed by Crowthorne before the room theft, because after years of living with predation, she had copied and lodged duplicates with Mrs. Vale the first week at Norhaven. Crowthorne had retrieved them when her room was ransacked. The letter was read aloud. Lady Anderson's composure fractured. "Every mother says things in exasperation." "You are my stepmother," Rebecca said quietly, "and I was 22. The Chancellor raised a hand for silence. By the third day the injunction came. Sir Basil prohibited from enforcing any marriage contract. Trust assets frozen pending judgment. Pike held for perjury review. Under pressure of impending criminal referral, Pike requested to amend testimony. He named Sir Basil directly, then Lady Anderson, in arranging forged signatures and disbursement routing. He wept while doing it. No one believed the tears. Sir Basil's counsel asked for adjournment. Sir Basil himself left by a side door and did not return. Lady Anderson remained to the end, rigid with hate. When judgment voiding the waiver was read, she turned to Rebecca, not with collapse, but with naked contempt. "You think this makes you one of them," she hissed as officers waited. "You are still what you were." Rebecca looked at her for a long moment, then answered with the steadiness that had carried her from attic to witness chair. "No, I am what I choose, at last." The day the final order arrived at Norhaven, rain had finally broken into hard blue sky. In the west drawing-room, Crowthorne read aloud while Rebecca stood at the window. Waiver voided, trust and accumulated interest restored, civil penalties attached, criminal exposure stayed only if restitution completed, Sir Basil withdrawn from public engagements under threat of prosecution, Lady Anderson granted reduced allowance contingent on residence in Bath, and no contact without written consent. When he finished, there was no cheer, just a deep, strange quiet, like a house after fever breaks. Mrs. Vale exhaled first. "Thank God." Crowthorne closed the folio. "Miss Anderson, funds will transfer within 5 banking days. You may instruct investment or disbursement as you wish." "As you wish!" The phrase felt unreal in her chest. She sank into a chair and only then realised how tired she was. Tired in marrow, in teeth, in the muscles of her jaw from holding herself together. The Duke came in without announcement, saw her face and dismissed the room with a glance. Crowthorne and Vale withdrew silently. For a minute neither spoke. Then she said, half laughing, half shaking, "I thought I would feel triumphant. I feel emptied out." He crossed to the sideboard, poured water, handed it to her. "Emptiness after battle is not failure, it is surviving." She drank. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. "Oliver?" she asked. "Asleep. He spent an hour instructing the gardener where white roses ought to be moved, because they need better light if they are to do things properly." Something loosened in her chest. A tyrant in the making. A benevolent one, I hope. She set down the glass and looked at him fully. "I need to decide quickly where to live. I won't return to Anderson House. You need not hurry for my convenience." "I do not intend to be anyone's dependent ornament," she said, the old fear sharpening into resolve as she heard herself. I have means, now. I mean to use them." "For what?" She had turned this over through sleepless nights, through hearings and rail miles and ink-stained mornings. Now the answer came clean. "A school," she said. "For tenant girls first, then village girls, if we can expand. Not charity that teaches embroidery and obedience. Literacy, accounts, contracts, enough French and music to pass drawing-room scrutiny if they want service, but numbers so no one can steal their wages, with a smile." He did not speak at once. Then, "That is the most formidable proposal I have heard this year. Will your tenants object?" "They will object to change because people do," he said. "Then they will send daughters when they see results." She nodded, suddenly close to tears for no dramatic reason at all, only because this, planning a future aloud without asking permission, felt like stepping onto solid ground after years on ice. He must have seen it because his voice gentled. "Rebecca." It was the first time he had used her name without title. She looked up. "You have no obligation to stay in this county," he said. "No obligation to me. If you choose London, Edinburgh, anywhere, I will ensure safe arrangements and no interference." There it was again. Choice, offered and left open. "I know," she said softly. "That is why I can stay." He courted her correctly, not with ambushes in shadowed corridors, not with half-spoken implications while servants pretended blindness. He called in the afternoon with Mrs. Vale present. He asked permission before walking with her in the rose garden. He wrote notes that said what they meant and signed them plainly. "May I call Tuesday if you are not engaged with school plans? Oliver requests your opinion on maps and insists this is not an excuse to see you. I am less strict about honesty than he is." She laughed over that one at breakfast in the small morning room where, for the first time in memory, food appeared without being a test. Her hands stopped shaking when she lifted the teapot. No one counted slices. Summer turned. Her school took shape in a former steward's cottage on Norhaven land. Windows repaired, slates delivered, benches built by 2 carpenters who argued over angles and then stayed late anyway. Rebecca interviewed teachers herself. She rejected one lady who called farm girls slow stock, hired a widow who had kept her husband's books for 12 years and knew exactly what ignorance cost. The county watched, sceptical and fascinated. Some called it eccentric, others dangerous. Girls arrived regardless, shoes muddy, eyes bright. One evening in late September, after lessons, she found the Duke waiting by the half-finished school gate, hat in hand like any suitor. "You look exhausted," he said. "I taught fractions to 12 children and one furious goose who refuses exclusion from the yard. Exhaustion is guaranteed." He smiled. A real one, rare and transforming. "May I walk you home?" "You may." They took the long path by harvested fields. Stubble scratched gold under a low sun. For a while they spoke of practical things, slate costs, tenant petitions, Oliver's insistence that geography include sea monsters for morale. Then, near the copse where leaves had begun to bronze, he stopped. "I have been precise for months," he said. "I want to be plain now." She waited. "I love you." The words came rough, unadorned, not because you managed my son's grief, though you did, not because you're brave in public, though you are, because with you silence is not absence, because you tell the truth when it costs, because you see the parts of me I buried and do not turn away. Her breath caught. She had imagined this moment in 100 cautious versions. None sounded like this. He went on, eyes steady on hers. "I also fear this. You know that. I fear failing at tenderness more than at governance. But I will not hide behind fear again." She stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse at his throat. Then be plain with one more thing. Anything. If I marry you, I do not disappear into your title. The school remains mine to run. My income remains legally separate where the law allows and contractually protected where it does not. If we disagree, we argue with words, not withdrawal, and if you retreat into silence, I will drag you out of it by the ear. A startled laugh broke from him. By the ear? Metaphorically. Usually, he repeated, then sobered. Yes, to all of it. We draft settlements as you wish. We argue with words. And I permit ear-dragging under protest. She smiled then, helplessly. Under protest, accepted. He lifted a hand, paused for consent. At her nod, he touched her cheek with reverence so careful it almost undid her. She leaned into his palm. I am not asking tonight, he said. Not yet. Oliver would never forgive me if I stole his role in this operation. Operation? He has plans involving a flower. Of course he did. The proposal came 3 weeks later, on a bright, cold morning. Frost edged the schoolhouse windows. Rebecca was in the yard showing 2 girls how to total market sums when a small, determined figure in a navy coat marched through the gate carrying a white rose in full bloom, guarded by a footman who looked as if he had been forbidden to interfere. Oliver stopped in front of her, solemn as at 6, but taller now, less brittle. This is the right one, he announced, offering the rose. Not a bud, a proper one. I checked. She took it carefully. It is perfect. He nodded and stepped aside with ceremonial gravity. The Duke stood just beyond. No audience but 3 curious schoolgirls and a goose. He came forward, removed his gloves, and went down on one knee in damp grass without looking away from her. Rebecca Anderson, he said, voice steady and wholly uncovered. Will you marry me? The girls gasped. The goose honked in outrage. Oliver glared at the goose. Rebecca laughed, through tears she did not bother to hide. Yes, she said, yes. Oliver punched the air once, then remembered dignity and folded his hands behind his back. The Duke rose, and when he kissed her, it was not rescue, it was agreement. On the first day of winter term, Rebecca stood at the front table of the Norhaven Girls' School, with sealing wax warming in a brass spoon. 12 new enrolment certificates lay stacked beside her, cream paper plain but good. The rooms smelled of chalk, wool cloaks drying by the stove, and wet earth tracked in by boots. At the back, Mrs. Finch, the widow she had hired, sorted copybooks while muttering happily about ink quality. Through the window, tenant mothers clustered in shawls, pretending not to peer. Miss Anderson, asked little Jane Miller, nose pink from cold, do I sign there? Yes, Rebecca pointed. Full name if you can, mark if you must, and we learn the rest together. Jane gripped the pen, tongue between teeth, and produced a determined J that wandered uphill. Rebecca smiled. Excellent beginning. The wax was ready. Rebecca tipped the spoon, neat and controlled, and pressed the school seal into place. No spill, no shaking. By noon, the room was loud with recitation. 7 times 8, called Mrs. Finch. 56, chorused the older girls. From the doorway came a knock. The Duke, hat in hand, Oliver at his side with a satchel nearly his size. Am I late? Oliver demanded. Father said magistrates are always late, and I said that is slander. Hensley, who had come to inspect term opening with exaggerated sternness, coughed into his scarf. I heard that, young lord. Oliver looked unrepentant. Good, Rebecca waved him in. You may distribute slates as penance. He did so with military efficiency, whispering to the youngest, If sums look scary, do the corners first. Miss Rebecca says corners are where tricks hide. At midday break, Crowthorne arrived with final legal copies. marriage settlements executed as negotiated, school charter registered under Rebecca's trusteeship, separate property protections in force. He handed the packet over with rare softness. "Your father would have approved this drafting," he said. Rebecca took the papers, throat tight. "Thank you for helping me make sure the law did too." News travelled as news does. Sir Basil had quit London for his health, which everyone translated correctly. Pike, having traded testimony for leniency, copied inventories in a remote office where no one let him near signatures of value. Lady Anderson resided in Bath on a narrowed allowance, her invitations thin and colder each month. She wrote once. Rebecca returned the letter unopened. In the evening, after lessons and ledgers and a supper full of Oliver's opinions about cartography, Rebecca climbed the stair to her room at Norhaven. No attic now, but she still kept one drawer locked out of habit. Inside lay her father's surviving ledgers, the court order bearing her name, and, wrapped in linen, the white rose from the proposal, pressed flat and pale as memory. She set a new ledger on the desk and opened to page 1. Norhaven Girls' School Accounts, Winter Term. Below, in a hand steady as law, she wrote the first entries: slate purchase, stove coal, teacher's wage, donation from His Grace, accepted with gratitude, no conditions. She sanded the ink, closed the book and looked out the window. In the yard below, lantern light caught on Frost. The Duke crossed toward the stables, Oliver running ahead, both heads bent over some earnest disagreement. Their voices drifted up, warm, ordinary, hers. Once she had stood in a corridor as punishment for spilling wax while hunger shook her bones. Now, with her name intact and her keys in her own pocket, Rebecca turned down the lamp and went downstairs to join her family,